The Vikings fever spread like wildfire and became such a big hit that fans wanted more. Can't blame them, it had everything. A decent storyline based on historical events, a part of history that hasn't seen a lot of adaptations, and some fantastic performances. People wanted more though, and that's what they got with Vikings Valhalla, the spin-off. However, the spin-off has raised some questions about England's history. First, did England have a Viking king? Valhalla's Canute and Edmund's story true? Before we dive in, it needs to be mentioned that most TV shows, films, and almost any work of art draw inspiration from historical events. The degree to which the adaptation is true totally depends on the producers and directors, and they tend to exaggerate events for dramatic effect. If they didn't, it simply wouldn't be fun to watch, and it's important to remember that we shouldn't get our history lessons from TV shows and films. Now that we've established that, let us explore to the degree to which Vikings Valhalla story is accurate to the history of England and whether it was ruled by a Viking king. The events of the spin-off Vikings Valhalla take place 100 years after the events of the original Viking series and revolves around the beginning of the end of the Viking Age. There is a lot of truth regarding the timeline as they include the Battle of Stamford Bridge. No, we're not talking about soccer derby in England, but the actual battle that happened between the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Norway. Now we have England ruled by Vikings. If we go back to England 1,000 years ago exactly, we would find ourselves in the Kingdom of England ruled by Canute the Great, also known as Canute, a name you all must be familiar with. So to answer the question most straightforwardly, yes, England was ruled by Vikings. King Canute ruled 3 kingdoms: the Kingdom of England from 1016, the Kingdom of Denmark from 1018, and the Kingdom of Norway from 1028, establishing the North Sea Empire. He arrived in England in 1015, and after the Battle of Edward, the young boy king, also shown in Vikings Valhalla, entered peace talks and decided to rule in tandem with the boy king. As history suggests, this was done to ensure that the people of England remain united under the rule of the Viking king Canute. He was already having troubles with his rule over Scotland, which was weak throughout his era. Of course, things about both kings, the way they ruled and the history is quite different from the way it was portrayed in the show. Next, the St. Brice's Day Massacre. The theme of the show resonates with a story of revenge. One of the central events that the story is based on is the St. Brice's Day Massacre under the rule of King Æthelred. He ordered the death of Vikings living in England, as they weren't Englishmen, and their numbers needed to be drastically reduced. So all of the Vikings living around England at the time were executed in the first episode of the show. Horrifically enough, this is based on a true historical event. It happened on the feast of St. Brice of Tours, a 5th century bishop, and the Danish people living in England were celebrating the day in St. Freydís church, and it was burned to ensure maximum casualties. It was done by the Kingdom of England as a response to the countless raids by the Vikings at the time. While the story was based on a true event, there were obviously some adaptations for the storyline in Vikings Valhalla. This event set the tone for King Canute and his army of Norsemen to invade England to take their revenge for what had happened to their people. Now let's look into King Edmund's true story. The story of King Edmund is also a point of confusion, and many historians would dispute that the portrayal of King Edmund in Valhalla Vikings isn't accurate at all. Some have gone as far as to say that the only thing common between King Edmund from the series and King Edmund from history is the name. The story from Vikings Valhalla talks about King Edmund being a teenage boy king, and somewhat gives off the vibe similar to Joffrey Baratheon from Game of Thrones. Fine, maybe King Edmund wasn't as evil as Joffrey, but the underprepared and boy king similarities are aplenty. Vikings Valhalla has King Edmund as an obedient boy who listens to his father and follows his advice. However, that again might not be very accurate. According to some historical records, Edmund actually led a revolt against his father and defied him to marry a widow in a bid to consolidate power in the eastern part of England. Not quite the golden boy then. Next, boy king or Ironside. When we take a look at King Edmund from real history, the story's somewhat different. He was actually a very brave fighter who wasn't a boy at all. Rather, some historical accounts even claim that he might have been older than King Canute. This is definitely inconsistent with what we see during the show, but for dramatic effect, it's understandable. That's not the only difference though. King Edmund also wasn't known as Boy King, as the story suggests. In fact, he had a better nickname, and he was known as Edmund Ironside. This goes well with the rest of the historical records, as Edmund is considered a fighter and his resistance against the Vikings' army was adored by the people of England. Despite losing out to Canut's superior forces, Edmund's influence and bravery earned him the possibility of brokering a peace settlement with Canute. Again, we see that this is somewhat different from what we've seen in the show. Canute even mocks Edward and is surprised that he's so young, when in fact the two kings were probably of the same age. While the show got the peace settlement thing almost right, they skipped the bravery part and explained it through a strategic move on Canute's part. Now let's dive into King Edmund's death. One last disputed fact about King Edmund was his death. From what we've seen in the show, Edmund's killed a short while after taking the throne. He's seen conspiring against Danish rule with Godwin and other English nobles as they tried to restore English rule in the kingdom. Godwin's betrayal, however, leads to the death of King Edmund as he's murdered by his most trusted advisor. A trap set up by Godwin in which Edmund falls while riding his horse, and when he falls to the ground, Godwin doesn't waste any time before killing the young boy king immediately. This is believed to be quite different from what actually happened. The history books indicate that King Edmund died soon after the peace settlement, but the cause of his death remains unknown. Some highly trusted accounts have pinpointed his death to battle wounds, but there's no consensus by historians on how King Edmund died. Now for some discrepancies between Valhalla's Canute and the real Canute. King Canute, played by the talented Brad Freydís, has been the mainstay of Vikings Valhalla. His invasion and eventual seizure of the throne in England, along with his other exploits, have been iconic, to say the least. Despite the creative liberties taken by the producers, the real story of King Canute is just as fascinating, if not more so. We take a look at some of the differences between the real King Canute and Brad Freydís' brilliant portrayal of King Canute. In the show, it has been shown that King Canute's open to paganism as well as British Christianity, and that doesn't seem too far away from the truth. However, it's to be noted that King Canute was a devout Christian who was closer to the Norse lifestyle than he was to the English one. This cultural aspect's an increasingly important mainstay of the show. In the show, there's a clear difference between the two factions, Christian Vikings and Vikings that continue to follow the old gods. The leader has a balancing act to accomplish, and he has to tread a careful line. All of this might be much closer to the truth, but in reality, Canute was a ruthless leader, and his historical successes were down to buying out power rather than based on goodwill. But we can forgive that. There's also some confusion regarding the timeline of events. When discussing what happened in reality, the St. Brice's Day massacre took place around 14 years before Canute's rise to the throne in England. The Vikings did invade the Kingdom of England in light of this brutality, but it wasn't done by Canute, rather by his father. He was probably around at this time, but there's no historical evidence to suggest that he played a significant part in the first invasions. Not to mention, Canute's invasion of the Kingdom of England differs somewhat from one we've seen in the show. According to the show, the invasion was swift, but history suggests that many battles took place from Wessex and Essex to Dorset and Northumbria. Although the betrayals of individuals like Eadric Streona remain spot on, and most of the representation regarding King Canute and his invasion of England remains true. That's a wrap for this video. Do you have any questions about Vikings Valhalla and how accurate their portrayal has been of historical events? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one. See you